So tonight, I'm pleased to welcome Kim Severson. She joins us to speak on her new book, Spoon-Fed: How 8 Cooks Saved My Life. In the growing food movement, much has been said on the power of what you eat and how you eat it. However, Miss Severson's long-lasting relationship with food and her own personal struggles combine to tell a unique story. The St. Petersburg Times writes that a poignant story told with Severson's trademark humor and open-armed love of family and friends. If you're in need of life lessons, you'll find some to suit you. Spoon-Fed pays homage to some remarkable women, and whether Severson believes it or not, she is one too. And from the New York Times, Spoon-Fed is an excellent example of a relatively new genre, one that considers food as therapy. In Kim Severson's case, it's not just cooking that helps her deal with life's vicissitudes, but writing about food. But more in accounts of her dealings with these women. They are pegs on which she hangs her metaphorical garments with the purpose of revealing a little more of herself each time one is removed. Ms. Severson has been a staff writer for the New York Times since 2004. She spent 6 years as a food writer for the San Francisco Chronicle and spent 7 years with the Anchorage Daily News in Alaska. She won the Casey Medal for Meritorious Journalism for her work on childhood obesity in 2002 and 4 James Beard Awards for food writing. Previous works include the New Alaska Cookbook and the Trans Fat Solution, Cooking and Shopping to Eliminate the Deadliest Fat from Your Diet. We are thrilled to have her with us tonight, so will you please join me in welcoming Kim Severson.
Thank you very much. I know you're all disappointed I'm not reading from the Trans Fat Solution. So, it's such a nice day. I really appreciate everybody showing up. I'm a little surprised that more Harvard graduates didn't find this an event to take their parents to tonight, but I understand they may be going to dinner or something. I know it was lovely to see where all of that happened, although we were asking some people how Souter's speech was, and they were like, "Oh, it was all right." I'm like, "Geez, it's like a tough crowd." I'm like, who do you have to be to like get a good review here? Jeez. So, anyway, yeah. So my book Spoon-Fed is a memoir. It's about some famous cooks who I came upon in my adventures as a food writer for the Chronicle and the New York Times. They're all women in the book, and I had gotten asked like why there are no men in the book, and that's an undercovered area, men, and I should have put more in, obviously, but also, this is my mom is a part of one of the 8 cooks, and writing this book was cheaper than going to therapy, so that's really all these women who anyway. But I'll start with I'll read 2 little sections from it. I have to take my glasses off because I'm getting old and my eyes are doing that reverse thing. So one of the women in this book is Ruth Reichel, who many of you may or may not know. She's was the editor of Gourmet, may it rest in peace. She was also a food critic, the restaurant critic at the New York Times. And when I showed up at the Times, I ended up sitting in her old desk only because, it's like a newspaper and there's, a bunch of crummy desks around and there's yours, kid, good luck. And I was very intimidated by her, and I'd always been somewhat intimidated by her even when I first went to San Francisco, and her first memoir, Tender at the Bone, had just come out, and she lived on this street near Martin Luther King Drive and on Dwight, and I used to drive by like it was all very single white female, kind of like, is that her house? Is that where she was? And, I got kind of obsessed about her. And so anyway, then I'd spent some time with her, did a profile of her for the Chronicle. And when I moved to New York, I decided I'm going to boldly go and try to talk to her. So after my byline showed up in the paper a few times, I reached out to Ruth. Would she like to have lunch? I'd love to, she wrote me in an email. She'd been meaning to get in touch with me since I landed, she said. Maybe that was one of the polite lies that greased so much of New York life, but I didn't care. We were going to have lunch, and surely Condé Nast would pick up the tab. Of course, I was out of my mind with nerves. Who wouldn't be? This was the powerful and fabulous Ruth Reichel, the Condé Nast editor who slipped through the city in a black town car that was always at her disposal. This was the most famous woman in food writing in America. I'd met her before, sure, but this was different. We were going to be just chatting like friends or colleagues. I couldn't hide behind my notebook. Do you like how I look up at somebody told me I have to look up at the audience, so I've been practicing that. Let me know how it works. So Ruth liked to hold her lunches at a place called Sushi Zen on 44th Street. It's a precise, delicious sushi restaurant with a kind of impersonal Midtown New York feel to it. It was just around the corner from her office, and the owners adored Ruth, of course, so lunch was always whatever the chef felt would please Miss Reichel. I'd yet to figure out how long it actually takes to walk anywhere in New York, which is a skill that takes some time to acquire. When you're new and somebody tells you to meet them and you look at the map and see it's 15 blocks away, you have no way to judge how long that'll take. Some blocks take 7 minutes to get across, others 3. There's shortcuts and crowds to account for. So I arrived way too early and stood awkwardly in the lobby, feeling big and hulky and in the way. She finally swept in. We did the stupid double kiss thing and then headed immediately to her table. It's a little two-top to the right of the door, but toward the back of the restaurant. Stupidly, I took the booth side. I would later learn that Ruth always takes the booth side. A woman came to the table. "Feed us," Ruth said. In no time, I began babbling. I don't know what I said, but she just seemed to keep beaming up at me with that damn Cheshire cat smile, which only made me tap dance harder. I was drowning before I even got near the water. We started with mushroom broth and then took in a parade of sushi and sashimi. I continued to babble. She murmured through the mackerel and purred past the tuna belly. "I always save the uni for last," she said. "It's like dessert." I nodded, my mouth prematurely full of uni. I could not tell you what we talked about, except I know it involved the latest we'd each heard about Marion Cunningham. Like a pair of siblings, at least we could always talk about Mom. A few months later, I was starting to feel like New York was not going to swallow me up whole after all. I was still not a part of the city, but living here was starting to feel pretty cool. The landscape was shifting. I'd gotten on the front page a couple of times. I didn't drag in the door at the end of each night exhausted from the pace. I was seeing plays and listening to music and eating all kinds of things I'd never tasted before. And I was confident enough to email Ruth and boldly suggest another lunch. I'd discovered a Southern Indian place nearby. Would she want to meet me there? "There's no Indian place on 46, she writes back. Ha, there is. I actually knew something she didn't. It was a feeling not unlike finding out the nasty head cheerleader now weighed 300 pounds and lived in a trailer. I met her in the lobby of Condé Nast, and off we went. Eating at this place was a logistical challenge. You had to make your way to the back of the restaurant and jump online, trying to scan the specials and peer into the steam table pan so when the time came, you'd be ready. A lot of the young Indian office workers in the area made it their regular cafeteria, and they knew exactly what they wanted and were in a hurry to get it. I spotted a rare empty table right by the door and told Ruth to grab it. Then I went to the back and ordered a couple of mango lassis and a spicy masala dosas. I made my way back to the table with an orange tray loaded with food. We caught up on Marion Cunningham. We talked a little about the paper and the magazine. Chit-chat. We both really liked the food, but as usual, I felt like I was boring the crap out of her. She was still a cool, popular girl, no matter how well I seemed to be doing. Toward the end of the meal, the office workers thinned out and an old woman lurched in. She had a crumpled brown paper bag that she'd fashioned into kind of a bowl. She had on several layers of clothes, and although I can't recall if this is true or just my mind filling in the details, she smelled strongly of old cigarettes and boiled urine. I tensed up and prepared my New York face. My plan was to act cool and ignore her until she went away or became someone else's problem. I might even call the manager over if I had to. Ruth, instead, took out a $5 bill and put it in her bag. She smiled at the woman until a worker at the restaurant hurried over and sent her out the door. "I always give money to women on the street," Ruth said. What if it was my mother and no one would give her a thing? At that moment, a couple things occurred to me. First, the only way to survive New York was to have a good set of guidelines. Ruth's rule to always give money to women on the street was one. But the ultimate lesson from that period in my life came like a beautiful gift at yet another lunch with Ruth. This time, instead of the busy Indian place, she suggested we go back to her favorite sushi restaurant. I had an agenda. I wanted to tell her all about this book, about how I wanted to write about women cooks who taught me life lessons. I confessed everything, the need I had for role models in the kitchen and at the computer, about my early obsession with her and my constant feeling that she was so much cooler than I could ever hope to be. She laughed, and it seemed like she laughed for a long time. "That's funny," she said. "I always felt that way about Alice Waters. I was like the little match girl pressing my face against the window, especially in Berkeley. Everyone was having better parties and doing better drugs and having better sex." She saw her books as studies in insecurity, about her never measuring up. I never read them like that. I saw a self-satisfied woman with a passel of exquisite food and sexual experience I could never have, and a better writer than I could ever hope to be. My popular girl, insecure? Then Ruth took my hands and looked into my eyes and told me I was actually her hero, that she'd always looked up to me, that I was the kind of writer she could only hope to be. She said I could use her town car whenever I wanted, and when I was ready, I could be the editor-in-chief of Gourmet and move into her apartment. Okay, I made that last paragraph up. But here's the truth I learned from Ruth. Popular girls are my own boogeymen, made of my own free will. Because I worried I might not be good enough, I couldn't stop comparing myself, especially to women who rightly should be my best allies. What a waste of time, all that measuring myself against other people. The only ruler that matters is the one I pull out at the end of the day. Did I do my best? Did I tell the truth? Was I helpful to my fellows? And did I make something good to eat? So that's my little reading about Miss Ruth Reichel. So I'll read you one more little section, and then, I don't know, then we can all do something else. But no heckling. Thank you. So, okay, what the hell kind of, anyway, okay, so this is a story about Alice Waters, who's also one of the women in this book, and she came to New York when I was writing for the New York Times, and I wanted to do a story where I would shop at the Green Market with her and then go back to my house and make lunch with her. And you need to know that my partner Katya was pregnant with our 2-year-old daughter, and anyway, that's kind of the setup, and she was at home and going to meet us for lunch, so here we go. Let me tell you about the time I saw Alice Waters' underwear, and she nearly saw a domestic meltdown at my house. It all happened the same day, almost 10 years after I first watched her swoop into Chez Panisse. I'd moved east to write for the New York Times, and Alice agreed to meet me at the Green Market so I could write a story about her and her new cookbook. This is the biggest of the 70 or so farmers markets that are woven into the city. Some, like the ones trying to get a foothold up in Harlem, are 3 or 4 stands, but Union Square is where they started. And after 30 years, it's evolved in such a varied collection of vendors selling meat, bread, and vegetables that even the most uninspired person couldn't walk away without a new idea about something to eat. This would be a fine place, I thought, to ask Alice to meet me. My plan was to walk her around the Green Market, shop for lunch, and then schlep all of our finds back to my apartment on the first floor of an old brownstone in Brooklyn and cook. I wanted to show people how simple and easy it was to prepare food from the Green Market. A photographer and a video crew from the paper would meet us. I popped up from the subway, and there she was, the tiny Berkeley lady with a big woven shopping bag in her hand. "Well, hello, my dear," she said. It was New York hot, and I was already sweating like Nixon. I leaned down and gave her the double kiss thing you have to do with some people. I'm always clumsy with it. For a while, I tried to enforce only single kissing, but that's even more awkward. After our graceless greeting, she immediately ordered me behind a tent. The Times video journalist assigned to the story needed Alice to put a microphone on its wireless power pack somewhere on her petite body. Because the day was so hot, we'd all worn the flimsiest clothes we could. Alice was draped in an airy purple top and a thin brown skirt that fell to her knees. Of course, this left no pockets and no waistband for the power pack. We struggled to find a place to put it, trying parts of her blouse. Then she turned her back to me, hiked up her soft little skirt, and said, "Let's try this." This was not exactly one of the great moments in journalism I dreamed I might have when I joined the Times. But Alice is a can-do girl, and I took inspiration from her lead. I bent over and figured out pretty quickly that the microphone pack would only drag down her panties. "Alice," I said, "I don't think this is going to work." About the same time, we eyed her big, sturdy market basket and tossed the radio pack in the bottom. We attached the microphone to her blouse, and off we went, hoping for the best. The shopping went well, but Alice was stopped enough times to make it a long trip. Are you, a man stammered. "Yes, I'm Alice," she said. "I just want to thank you for everything you've done." A woman from a little home-style restaurant in Greenpoint bravely walked up to say hello, her words tumbling out as she tried to explain that everything she does, everything in the kitchen, is done with a sensibility inspired by Alice. "Well, I would love to come to your restaurant," Alice said. "Please don't," said the woman. "If you came in, would freak out." After a couple of hours, we had a huge haul, and I was getting worried about how we were going to turn it into lunch, let alone a story for the paper. Simply having Alice Waters come to your house is enough to keep you up at night. It's like the time your parents invited your second-grade teacher over for dinner. You suddenly see everything through her eyes, and I immediately thought, I live in a dump. I worried about the Diet Pepsi in the refrigerator and the package of Lipton onion soup mix in the cupboard and whether the 3 cans of olive oil I had would be good enough. And not to worry, she brought her own. The other factor was Katya. She's a journalist herself and a really good sport. I've forced her to drive many miles out of our way to squish through a muddy field just to talk to a goat farmer or make a special stop to eat a small greasy cheeseburger at an old roadside stand someone had told me about. "Isn't this the best cheeseburger you ever had?" I'd say. "Well, it's good," she'll say gamely. "Wait, you have to taste this coconut ice cream. Isn't it amazing?" "Well, it's good," she'll say. "Try this cheese. Don't the nettles make it sublime?" "Well," she'd say, "it's good." Katya was going to have lunch with us that day, mostly to keep me from freaking out. I should mention 2 other things about Katya here. 1, she was 4 months pregnant with our daughter, Samantha, and at the time she was eating like a linebacker. And two, she's got a touch of the hypoglycemia, which means she has to have a good hit of protein in her stomach every few hours. So when I say, "Is it okay if we make one quick stop so I can check out this kebab place?" she will invariably say yes. This is a food writer's dream partner. She had asked only one thing of me as I headed out the door that morning. "Just make sure you call before you get in the cab to come here, okay?" "Sure, see you around noon." Did I remember to call? No. By the time we'd gotten through the market, filmed the segments, endured at the Alice worshippers, and packed into the trunk of a cab several bags filled with hyssop and thyme and basil and runner beans and tomatoes and eggs and peaches and golden raspberries, I'd forgotten that one detail. I made it through the 2 front doors of our building and eased open the one to our apartment. Katya, honey, we're here. No response. She must be getting dressed, I thought. The muggy day was hovering around 85 degrees, and we were all parched. I wanted to get something cool to drink in Alice's hands quickly. I figured we'd unload the haul on the dining room table, and while Alice was sorting through it, I could go back to the kitchen and tell Katya we were ready for drinks. Then I'd head back and help everyone get settled. We set our bags down, and Alice requested the loveliest platters I had to display it all. I pulled some from the shelves and went to find Katya. I smelled something cooking and looked in the toaster oven. Sizzling along nicely were a half a dozen frozen chicken nuggets and some French fries. Okay, at least the nuggets were Bell & Evans, the most natural version you can buy, and the French fries were organic too. We'd purchased them both at the Brooklyn Food Co-op where we worked. But it didn't matter. Alice Waters was in my house, and chicken nuggets were cooking in my toaster oven. I'd heard something in the bathroom and threw open the door. Katya was standing in the tub, dripping wet. "What are you doing?" I hissed. "Why didn't you call?" she spit back, her eyes blazing. It was like the married lesbian version of Lucy and Ethel having lunch, and Alice Waters was our Bill Holden. Katya figured we would be preparing something with no meat, and she was right. Aioli, boiled eggs, and vegetables were the centerpiece. But Katya needed some protein, and she was pregnant, so she indulged in one of her pregnancy cravings. She figured she'd take a quick bath, down a nugget or two, and be good to go when I called to say we were heading back from the market. Except I'd forgotten to call. So we jumped into action. She threw on a robe and whipped out the bathroom and headed to the kitchen, leaving little puddles of bathwater on the hallway tile. She pulled the offending items from the toaster oven, snuck into the bedroom to choke down a few and get dressed. I grabbed some glasses and a pitcher of ice water and went back to the front of the house to stall. Alice was sitting at a table looking at all that she had purchased and talking on the phone to her daughter Fanny. "Oh, it's so lovely," she was saying. "We have the most beautiful tomatoes and peaches, these tiny, lovely peaches, saved by the beautiful produce once again." Alice went to work hard for the next 2 hours in my little kitchen, making a beautiful lunch. We pitched in as directed, creating this menu. Eggs, soft-boiled for about 6 minutes. 3 kinds of beans, including a little pile of fresh shell beans she simmered in salted water with some thyme. Small, soft summer potatoes and artichokes. A glimmering bowl of olive green aioli made by hand. Thick slices of miche toasted in the toaster oven, which had already gotten plenty of use that day. For dessert, sliced peaches, nectarines, red raspberries, strawberries, and blueberries covered in a little chilled syrup she made from boiled golden raspberries. A friend she had brought along for her own moral and physical support moved the picnic table in our backyard across the bluestone and out of the sun. Eric Asimov, the great Times wine writer, whose desk is behind mine at the paper, had given me a bottle of French white, which I poured for them. I sat back, ate, and I was happy. At that moment, I saw that the life I was starting to have, was the life I wanted. I hadn't given up. I'd been patient. Just as it had with Alice over so many years, perseverance was starting to pay off. All right. So those are 2 little stories from Spoon-Fed. I will entertain questions at this time. I will not be addressing the Gulf oil spill. No, I'm sorry. I don't know. I think probably she was a little absorbed in her life, and I don't think said anything. Actually, after this, I sent her a Gallia, this book, and she said, "Oh, that was such a lovely lunch, wasn't it?" That's all she said. So I guess I'll never know.
What kind of sense of humor did she have? Could she have cut you the slack if
she did. She shakes her head at you hang out with her just a little bit, and you know exactly what you're doing wrong. I mean, I think that she would probably cut me a little slack. I don't think she would think it was funny. She'd just be like, "Oh dear, I've got more work to do on you." That's how she would be. She would be very loving about it, but like I say, we had Diet Pepsi in the fridge, and I'm a huge Diet Pepsi fan, but a few cans in the fridge, and I was really feeling like she's going to see that, but she ignored it. She was very polite, but I like I said, I don't know if she just lives in a rarefied world that we don't live in, and somehow she doesn't see anything that she doesn't want to see, which may be true. I don't know, but she was very sweet about this book, and gave me a big hug, and she's done a couple of media appearances with me about it, so hopefully she's not too upset. Well, the people that I wrote about in here are most of them are women that I wrote about, did profiles of, and when I was looking back at the profiles a little bit of the profile materials in here, but most of this is kind of sort of my story hung on these 8 women, and part of it was I wanted to write about Marion Cunningham originally, who's the first chapter in this book, and she is somebody who was kind of the last great home cook. She was rewrote the Fanny Farmer's cookbook and was James Beard's assistant for many, many years, wrote several cookbooks. And I wanted to write about the women of that generation, the cookbook authors, the people who taught us to cook. Now chefs and TV celebrities are teaching us how to cook, but it used to be the cookbook, Paula Wolferts and Diana Kennedy's and people who would research one subject and write cookbooks about them. So I wanted to write about Marion Cunningham, and then I thought maybe that's a little limiting and I want to write more. And I started to look at the people I had material on, and there were these women that I'd done these profiles for, and then I thought, why was I so interested in them to begin with? And I kind of started to see that there was there was something about them that I was attracted to for a particular reason when I was writing about them. And once I started to look with that frame, I was able to write my story. The story starts when I'm in Alaska and I find out I'm a big alcoholic and I have to quit drinking. And then I get hired a few months later at the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the great cosmic joke of my life, that I find out I have to get sober and then move an hour away from some of the best wine country in the world. But it's all right. It's my cross to bear. And then it sort of goes from there. So the only piece in here that was in a little bit in the same form, although it's much expanded, here was a piece I wrote about my grandmother's from Italy, and about traveling to Italy to try to understand why the spaghetti sauce my mother makes is to try to track it back to where my grandmother came from, which is kind of a big disaster because it's nothing like it at all. But it's evidence of two generations of immigrants to America. So it's a very kind of how that came to the point where my mother actually likes to use for a while something called Italian spice. Like she'll use like a basil oregano mix from McCormick's, and she's like, oh, that works just fine, honey. Put that in there. And the Italian sausages from the Safeway or whatever. And she grew up on a farm where they were scraping fat off the top of the crocks of sausages and drying their own herbs on the cookie sheet. And I was like, I'm so desperate for that kind of life. And she's like, why would you want to fool around like that? They have the nice grocery stores. You don't have to dry your own. Like, why would you dry your own herbs? Look, they got this nice package. So that's clearly somebody who grew up on a farm without a refrigerator and loves convenience, and then that sauce translates. And I can't make it. My brother, we all try to make it taste like my mom's, and you just can't if you've ever tried to replicate that, like measuring everything she puts in, and it still doesn't taste the same because she changes the recipe all the time, but that's another story. Well, because we have a 2-year-old at home, my cooking's gotten a lot worse because she's like, she's like, it's hard to cook one-handed, but then she's kind of into it. But my cooking, just doing the stories on some of these folks and being able to be in kitchens with chefs or watching people cook helped my cooking a lot. And then when I first came to the San Francisco Chronicles, I made Little Caesars pizza in college and was like a short order cook. But I was kind of okay, but I didn't know anything about that fancy chef cooking and anything. So, but when I got to the Chronicle and there were people there who had culinary degrees who were also on the food staff, and they didn't know a lot about reporting, and I knew a lot about reporting. So, because I'd been like a hard news, like a police reporter and cop reporter, and so they taught me how to cook, and I helped teach them something about reporting. So it was kind of a fair deal. And the more time I spent, I got to hang out and watch Alice Waters cook, and you learn things from that. So, so my cooking definitely has gotten better on this job. I still am not, I'm certainly not the best cook in my family by far, but if you came to my house, you'd leave happy, I think, maybe. It was very challenging to do in the first draft, and as a journalist, who the hell cares what I think? The whole point is what I'm reporting on, and and I'm not the story. So, telling my story, kind of my story underneath their profiles was a little bit tricky. The narrative parts weren't hard, like this happened, that happened, and this funny story happened, and then this sad, then this poignant thing happened, and then my mother got sick, and then that I could write. But my editor, the main thing she kept saying to me was, well, how do you feel? Well, how'd you feel about that? Well, when your dad said that, how did you feel? Well, how did you feel? And I just was kind of agonizing for me to I'm like, how many times do I have to say I was scared, I felt insecure, the bottom was falling out, it felt lousy, my head was on the bathroom floor. Like, what do I'm like, how many more ways can I tell you that this was hard, or I was sad, or there's only so many emotions, right? You're sad, you're happy, you're angry, it's like after a while, who cares? But in the end, I kind of understood how, it was just sort of reminds this kind of a funny joke where the editor of San Francisco Chronicle used to date a very famous actress, was married to a very famous actress, who shall remain nameless, but her initials are Sharon Stone. And she one time somebody was asking her about, are you worried that like if you have too much Botox that, it'll impact your ability to act? And she said, well, they can guess how I'm feeling. So I thought, well, they can just guess how I'm feeling in this book. But anyway, it was, I don't know why that story reminded me of that story. But yeah, but it was hard. So it was very hard. But I think that I finally, by the last chapter, I sort of figured it out. So I think the last chapter is really great. But then by that point, I was like, oh, okay, I've got all this figured out. And then I didn't really want to go back and re-emote and all the other, so anyway, but it was an interesting process. And then it's also at some point, if you're going to talk about your internal landscape, you just kind of have to separate yourself from it and just be as honest as you can with the material, because otherwise it's going to come off really, either it's not going to ring true or it's not going to feel good at the end when you're done. So at some point I just realized I just needed to honestly say how I felt, like as if I was talking to a friend or my partner, somebody I really trusted person, which was kind of the scary part. But I think there was just sort of no other way to do it than to just tell the truth and and be kind of as unvarnished, as I could, because, I just think in any way else, once you start to try to like, spin it or you're just going to be in a big mess and it's not going to read well. You're just going to be like, oh, I don't buy this at all. So at some point I just pulled the plug and went for it. And, and I was all freaked out. I was like calling other friends of mine who've done memoirs, and Frank Bruni, who's my colleague at the New York Times, also wrote a memoir. He had an eating disorder. We talk about like the genre of gay New York Times food writers with addiction issues. His was about eating disorder. This is now a new genre. There's two. Born Round. It's a great book. And, so we were laughing. We're like, well, so of the genre that you and I have now just created. But I would call him, because his book came out about 6 months before mine or a year before mine maybe, and I would just call him and be like, and he said, you just have to put on your big girl panties and own it. You wrote the book. It's just, separate yourself from it and just have it be the truth, and nobody can if it's the truth, it's the truth. So, but anyway, that's a long answer to a very short question. It's really agonizing, although it made me realize all the ways in which I, the potential to be sloppy in an interview. It made me really aware of that, and of, I've been misquoted a few times, not big things, but just, there's a few things I say all the time, little jokes I make all the time, and the words, they've, like one might be something about a bus and it'll be a car instead, and it'll just be like, really? Couldn't you even just, but it's made me want to be more prepared and more direct in my questioning, because I get people who just, rambling on. I don't even know what the question is. And I also realize that you feel, when I see something in the paper I feel is a little bit wrong. In my own paper, my own book review reviewed my book, and it was a measured review. There were some negative things in it. And I was very offended. But, the book review as a whole separate, they send it out to independent people, and they're very good about separating. It's not like we all write about each other. It's a very separate thing. And, it stung a little bit, and I thought I really got the taste of what it's like to write something negative about people, and I put my book out there and I can take it, and that's the whole thing, but it does hurt, so it maybe made me a little more conscientious about, if I'm going to poke somebody, I better really think about it and make sure that it's got a good purpose and there's a reason for it. Not do they deserve it, but can they, I think it's going to make me a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more careful. It's been really interesting, as you don't often get to see what it feels like to be the subject of stuff. So it's a harder job. And I was saying, I actually have renewed empathy for the public relations person's job, which is okay. Process with this than a cookbook. Yeah. The publishing world is a strange and mysterious world, and I'm so used to being, and at the times the editing is so intense, and it's like it is truly death by emery board, and there's always editors, and it's happening quickly, and you're getting a lot of feedback, and this they just sort of send you off. And with a cookbook, it's kind of design heavy, and they want to see pieces of recipes and text, and you're creating you're building a table, like this recipe has to look this way, and I'm going to have 125 recipes, and they're going to have these little head notes, and the frame is built, so it's easy. This is like, how many pages does it have to be? Really? And then how am I, because at some point, I'm a journalist, I'm used to writing short, and I'm like, I got to fill 200 so everything you do becomes material. So you're like, you go out and get a coffee, and you come back, and you're like, the pavement was hard underneath my feet. Like, you're just like, anything, like, what can I write? Let's see, the lights were, anything, because it just feels so big. So I had to kind of look at this like each chapter like a magazine article, and then I could kind of focus on it, and then I could go back and do that. But anyway, then the editing process was, I live in Brooklyn, and the publisher, Penguin, it's Riverhead, which is part of Penguin, it's in Manhattan, and messengers would show up at my door with chunks of my manuscript and pencil things and stickies, and I was like, could just like email me a document, or like what, it was sort of expecting somebody to ride up on a horse and hand me my freshly scrawled, it was just so old fashioned, but it was kind of nice in that way. Like, it was nice to have paper to look at and talk, and I would talk to my editor, it was kind of interesting, but it was very slow and mysterious. And then, at some point, you're going for that. I mean, let's just face it, this is also about making money, because I love the book, but I was like thinking, okay, this is phrase upon acceptance. So that's when you get another big check, right? So you get so I was like, what is upon, so I'd like go like, I knew that a bunch of bills were coming due. I was like, okay, my deadline was September. If I get it in, and then upon acceptance, I will get this check. And we needed the check, right? Because, Katya was probably, she wasn't working. We're living on my little, salary. So that process was, I could never get them to tell me what upon acceptance meant. And so I sent the thing in, and then we had some little exchanges, and I kept saying, so you were accepting this now? And she'd be like, oh, Kim, I accept everything. It's lovely. And I'm like, no, so you're accepting it, right? Is this on accept, so anyway, it was actually on acceptance, and I got the check, but it was like that, you just don't know what, so it was all right. It was a little hard to let it go. Then you get the galleys, and you get to look at those, and I wish I had one more pass through, but I guess that's for paperback, because I just think, there's words and stuff. It's a kind of a long and sticky, agonizing and mysterious process. But no, I would encourage everybody to do it. Super fun. To getting it back. So I think I turned it into like September, and then I did some stuff around Thanksgiving. Like, then a couple months I got back. I mean, I sent her in pieces because I wanted to make sure there were some things that, so I'd say, here are 3 chapters, what do you think? And she'd be like, well, I think you're doing good, but you really need to and then I'd go work on more chapters and send her a few to look at, and then finally the completed thing. So she had seen a lot of it, so there was not like a big surprise at the end. I think some people go off and don't talk to their editors for a year, and then they turn it in, and either you get a big surprise or you don't. But I was like bugging her a lot because I want to make sure I was on the right track, and just in the newspaper, I'm used to immediate like give and take. So anyway, turned in September. Then we went back and forth a little bit on a few things like through that, and then I didn't see anything about it again until like, or maybe I turned it in August, and then January a bunch more stuff. Like, then the kind of really like, you got to get going. And I had like a month to make all these, the final changes. And then I didn't see, and I think the galley came, because they rushed it a little bit. And then the galley came out in like middle of March, or beginning of March. And I know it was a kind of a crazy, that process I didn't understand either. So they were originally going to publish it May 1, and I was doing a bunch of stuff with Ruth Reichel actually at some conferences in Portland and in Seattle in April, and so they rushed up the date. But yeah, it was kind of a weird, like, hurry up, and then you sit there for 2 months, and then suddenly it's all got to be done, But it is kind of a weird thing. I'm working on a cookbook with one of my colleagues, and they're all like, well, it's going to be like a cookbook. I'm like, what is, like, with video? I'm like, never say cookbook around me again, because I can't even take that. Like, what does that mean? They want, like, to have little video components, so on your Kindle you could get the the cooking. And, actually cooking, like demo videos or like watching cooking on TV is kind of good, but you have to have, it takes time, unless you're just showing like, here's how to chop an onion or here's how to peel garlic. To do a whole recipe or even a lot of recipe, it takes at least a couple minutes, maybe 3, because you have to go through, and it's not, I don't think you want to, unless you're really deep into a recipe, I'm not sure you want to go to every recipe and watch the video, because anyway, so I don't know how this is all going to work out, but the publishers are trying to figure out how to have video components with every cookbook now. But again, that's just within the last 6 months or a year. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. I don't know. They just barely started selling my book on Kindle because Penguin was in a big fight with Amazon for since for 2 months, and they were both like, did not, did two, like forever. And so now they've come to an agreement on what percentage people get. So I don't know how that is affecting you all, but like whatever. Anyway, it is changing really rapidly. Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty democratic eater. Like I like certain, like, I mean, I occasionally have a Diet Pepsi, and I really like that Lipton onion soup mix dip sometimes. But it's because it reminds me of like my parents' rec room, like the first time I could have a party without being unsupervised or something, or football Sunday. Like there's some memory about that. But the thing I've just gotten much more concerned about is the cleanliness of the kitchens of restaurants I eat at. Although we'll eat a lot of street food, and I really do, but I can just like go in and smell like I can't. Katya is always like, because I will go into places and be like, we can't eat here because the smell, I just can tell the smell just doesn't smell fresh to me. So that bothers me, and I can't do as much, like Stouffer's frozen pizza stuff that I used to, like whatever, like, or fast food burgers, or although occasionally I'll have like a Big Mac or something. But I just know too much about where some of that meat comes from, and it's the meat especially that I'm really much more careful about. I'll eat a lot of crap processed food, or like a bowl of Cheerios or whatever. But I just, the meat, I've seen a lot of packing houses, and I just can't do it as much. And now that I have a 2-year-old, I'm like, you just read one story about some infant getting E. coli, and it just freaks you out. Although, that being said, I'll still eat a street hot dog. And I was talking with Ruth Reichel about this. Like, there's just a point at which you kind of like try to hold the tide back, and then sometimes you just, so. But it's mostly like bad restaurant smells. I can't. I get food sad. Food sad, where you're like, you think this piece of pizza looks so good and it's going to be great, and it's just kind of like disappointing. You're like, or like you keep looking for the great restaurant of the specialty in a town you're in, and finally you just get tired and you're like, okay, we'll just try it here. And then you find out the really great place was like a half a block away, and if you just walked a little farther, you would have. That's food sad, So I get food sad. Anyway, anyone else? Well, thank you all for showing up on this very nice night. I had a good time, so thank you.